Most of the time, when we think about time running from the past through the present to the future. And we think of it as an unbroken continuum. And we talk about time passing. But we never really say what we think time is passing. What it implies is that time is passing us, and that we are living separate from time, which is a delusion. It's easy to maintain because we have a word for time, in the same way that we have words for things that we think we can grasp and we can manipulate. But actually, that's just how our minds think about it. Time actually goes from the present moment backwards. It's like unwinding a spool of black thread backwards. There's just this present moment. This is the moment where we live and where we experience everything. And then as soon as this moment is over, the other side of this moment is a hope, a wish, a dream, an observation, but we don't yet know it. So one of the great giants of Zen, a man named Dogen, who lived in the 11th century and was dissatisfied with the teaching that he received in Japan. Buddhism had come to Japan, I think, in the 8th century. And it had gotten kind of codified and very elaborate and bureaucratic and formal. And at least some schools of it were. So Dogen went to China. And he traveled with a man that was his teacher in Japan. And they found another teacher there who was really old school. And by old school, I meant that he concentrated on helping his students reach satori, reach a breakthrough, to where they actually could get outside of their personality and see things as it is, see the world as it actually is. Because there's a big difference between the self and the personality. The personality is our personal history and compendium of experiences, our likes and dislikes and things we're neutral about. But that personality swims in big mind, and it swims in time. As a matter of fact, it does more than swim in time. It is time, according to Dogen. Anyway, Dogen founded and he founded Zen in Japan. And there are two kind of divergent tracks of Zen. I'm not going to evaluate them differently, although you'll see I'm a partisan to one as opposed to another. Dogen Zen concentrated on breakthrough and giving people an initial experience of reality, big mind. And then their training, which might go on for another 20 or 30 years even, consisted of them purifying their personal histories, their personal karma, understanding their habits and predilections, their desires, their envies, their rages. So the implication of that is, first of all, that satori or some insight is not the end of practice. It's actually a certain kind of beginning. It's also true that it's not a Heisman Trophy. You can live a perfectly good Buddhist life and not having had such an experience, because the Eightfold Path itself and the precepts are an enlightened life. They stem from an enlightened life. And your struggle to live up to them and your struggle to make them work is the act of purifying yourself. We live in just this moment. It's hard to remember this sometimes. There's only this moment. And each moment has a kind of initial phase, a fullness, and a passing phase. The ancient Buddhists said that a moment was made up of thousands of, I think the word was ksa, K-S-A, thousands and thousands of little tiny instants within a moment, which to me means that they saw it as a flow. They couldn't exactly discriminate where it began or where it ended. But spring is just spring. It's not early summer. And winter is just winter. It's not late fall or pre-spring. And I say that because each moment, each integer is time. Each moment is time. And time includes all the various parts, the blooming, the leaves coming, the leaves falling, the bees arriving, the birds arriving. Time is not outside of this. These things are not painted on time like it's a little red wagon and it's dragged around the zendo. To see time running past us is to see ourselves outside of time. And that's another way of seeing ourselves as a fixed, permanent entity and not coming to terms with our own impermanence. We are time. And just like everything else, we have an initiation, we have a fullness of expression, and we have a passing. Death is a moment, an initiation, a fullness, and a passing. That's the nature of how things are in the world, in this world. Time flows, yes it does, but it doesn't mean it goes from here to there. We know that something's moving. We can't exactly say what. But when we look at the solstices and the equinoxes, we can see that these flows are huge and vast. It takes 365 days for the Earth to go around the sun from December 21st to December 21st, which is the winter solstice, the longest night, the shortest day. That is time. It's not the ticking of a clock. It's not the breakup of the 12 hours into seconds and minutes, which is the way we've been taught and the way we've internalized it. You, your very own self, are time. And there's a great relief and release to understanding that and exploring that. A tree is time. Grass is time. A bird is time. It's impossible to separate time, just as it's impossible to separate time and place. It is, what time is it? It's 10:26. Well, 10:26 is Sebastopol, California, in front of my computer and my microphone and all these little other logos and things in front of me. For me, it's only this. I don't know what 10:26 is in Sedona. I don't know what it is in Los Angeles. So this is time. This is my time. Here's a Dogen quote. Time is not separate from you. And as you are present, time does not go away. Don't think that time merely flies away. Don't see flying away as the only function of time. If time only flew away, we would be separated from time. The reason that we don't clearly understand the time being, and Dogen uses that phrase, we say the time being meaning temporarily. He says the time being to mean time as its own being, its own entity. The reason you do not clearly understand the time being is that you think of time only as passing. But it doesn't pass, and it doesn't arrive. It's moving at different speeds in different places. Everything is a moment in time. You can only understand this if you can separate yourself, meaning your self-awareness, the fundamental ground of your own mind, which is awareness. Awareness and a sense of knowing. That's what's inside the empty pipe. It's awareness and knowing. We're aware of a body, we're aware of feeling, form, impulse, sensation, consciousness, and we know them when we see them. That's the fundamental ground of mind. And that's not personal. The ancient Zen patriarchs used to call that awareness the host, because it never goes away. The guest, the one who comes and goes, is the body, this sack of skin. The personality is part of the guest. The awareness is not personal. Your sense of self is Buddha's sense of self. If you think Buddha lived in time past, if you think he lived in, 2,500 years ago, you've buried the Buddha. But if you realize that your awareness is his awareness, or Bodhidharma's, Avalokiteshvara, or any of the saints and wizards, then they're still alive. Because this awareness is timeless. It doesn't arrive, it doesn't disappear. And to be able to slip outside of our personality or slip below our personality or let our personality rest for a moment, this is one of the things that Zazen helps us do, so that we get a visceral experience of the mind looking at the mind. Because the mind's always moving, it's always looking at something. And as long as it's busy with our narratives and our dramas and what mommy did or what daddy did or what she did or what he did, well, it's completely occupied and fascinated. But once it slows down, once we stop wiggling and stop moving and deny it impulse and sensation and concentrate on our breath and become more and more one-pointed, the mind has nothing to look at except itself. And when it does that, it sees the movie screen that the movie is cast upon. Now, we can't live there. And we're not supposed to live there. Satori or Kensho or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it is a temporary stop. But it changes everything. It's like you don't have to travel far if 6 feet takes you around a corner. And once you've actually seen everything as time, once you've actually seen the interdependence of everything, which is yourself, you won't forget it. And then you come back to the world with that memory, with that sensitivity, so that when you see a leaf or a flower, you also see the pollinating insects and the soil and the microbes in the soil that fed it and the birds that scattered the seeds, and you're always in kind of a different relationship to things than just an isolated self. So the host and the guest. There was a man named Hongji, who was a 10th generation Soto master, who explained pretty concisely the equal importance of the host and the guest. The host is not the prize and the guest is not the contestant on Jeopardy. Spiritual Jeopardy. If the host doesn't know there's a guest, there's no way to respond to the world. If the host, this awareness, this clarity and knowing, doesn't know that there's a guest, a sack of skin, a world of form, there's no way to respond to the world. And if the guest doesn't know that there's a host, if he doesn't know that there's a transcendent awareness which is larger than the personality, there's nothing but meat and potatoes. There's no hope for a spiritual dimension to life. You'll always feel like an isolated integer in the world. If the host doesn't know there's a guest, there's no way to respond to the world. If the guest doesn't know whether there is a host, there's no vision beyond material sense. In other words, to be in the world, we have to have a form. We have to. And I've spoken before that we have this area of the brain called the neural mode network, default mode network, which keeps us fixated on this form, on the clarity of isolated objects. That's our normal state. It obviously had evolutionary benefit. You know, if our Cro-Magnon forebear got so fixated by a butterfly, its beauty, he might not have seen the saber-toothed tiger creeping up behind him. But it's not fixed. And when we meditate and when we take psychedelics, that default mode network relaxes and the brain can utilize all its interstices in its neural connections, which approach infinite. We can't perceive all the expressions of time, the millions and billions of expressions of time, without a form and without sense organs. But without that awareness, there's no hope of seeing all of them in the spiritual dimension. For this reason, awakening in Zen Buddhism is sometimes spoken of in terms of dying. What separates us from this understanding is the confusion of the personality and the self. A Zen proverb says, "Let's go over a sheer cliff, die completely, and then come back to life. Then no one can deceive you." Well, obviously this doesn't indicate killing the body. Zen is not a suicide cult. Although sometimes in long sessions it might feel that way. It certainly did to me when I began my practice. I hated every moment of it. It refers to severing the connection. Maybe that's too severe. I say sometimes it means dropping down, dropping out of the bottom of the personality into the space and the awareness that surrounds it. Because that awareness grabs onto our thoughts, it grabs onto our feelings, it grabs onto our stuffy nose, it grabs onto that weird look somebody gave us, and it occupies itself with every permutation and combination possible. There's more. There's much more. These old-timers in Dogen's lineage placed great emphasis on kensho or awakening, not as a goal, but as a foundation of practice. Having this experience of absolute clarity and understanding, knowing beyond being explained away by some facile wordsmith, seeing with your own self, your own awareness, and knowing how the world is put together. And then you can never be deceived. You won't have to come sit and listen to me chatter, or read spiritual books, or awakening the chakra with crystals. But even after awakening, that's just the beginning. If you want to live a life without generating negative karma, you have to follow the precepts. Right livelihood, no killing, no stealing, no misuse of sexuality. You have to follow the Eightfold Path. Buddha's genius was in explaining these things really simply and clearly so that anyone could do them. We say when we sit zazen, we're letting our karma work on emptiness. Because karma begins with thoughts. I'll get that son of a bitch. And even that thought, if you feed it, will go on and start generating karma, negative karma. I was talking to somebody in Monday night class, and we were talking about, they were talking about cause and effect. And they gave an example of being in a situation where they were in a situation where they were triggered by not receiving positive support and affection, triggered them into negative behavior. But where it began was in the previous generation, with a mother that was too preoccupied with her own life to pay any attention to her children. So it's not like you do something bad and you get punished for doing it badly. It's that every act generates consequences. You might get it. You might not. Our children are going to take global warming in the shorts. My grandchildren, it's going to come to fruition in my granddaughter's life. When she's 40, it's going to be like she's living at 12,000 feet. There's going to be 30% less oxygen. So I had how many years of unconsciousness, driving cars, living large, doing whatever I could do, me and everybody else. That doesn't absolve us from the consequences. So kensho is not something you can hold on to like a personal treasure. It's actually, enlightenment is a verb. It's not a fence that we climb over, and on the other side we're these perfect people. And look at all the Zen communities that have been ravaged by teachers' careless sexuality or alcoholism or thievery. I mean, people are people. And a Zen master who's not paying attention is absolutely no different than any doofus who's not paying attention. He's another bozo on the bus. Here's Dogen again. The way the self arrays itself is the form of the entire world. You know what the word array means. It means to spread out a panoply of things. And it usually has a positive connotation. You lay out an array of jewelry or an array of paintings or an array of chocolates on the table. The way the self arrays itself, not the personality, the self arrays itself is the form of the entire world. See each thing in this entire world as a moment in time. So when we look out and we see hills and clouds and trees, birds, traffic, high tension wires, that is the array of the self. That's it. That's what our awareness is codependent with. We are not a little bubble isolated from all of it and watching it. That's what our personality thinks. That's what our small mind thinks. Our awareness accepts everything. And it's not like we're in here and it's out there. That idea that we're in here is just another way of saying I have a fixed and permanent self. Aren't I lucky? The way the self arrays itself is the form of the entire world. See each thing in this entire world as a moment of time. It's a real challenge. Because trees are a different moment than grass, a different moment than honeybees, a different moment than me. But we're all expressions of time. You could say time and emptiness represent kind of the same generative basis. Things do not hinder one another, just as moments don't hinder one another. The way-seeking mind arises in this moment. So moment, 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 moment. A thought arises in the mind. Wow. Way-seeking, meaning seeking the truth, seeking the way to move through all of this. And we can also say that a moment arises in the way-seeking mind. They're not separate. It's not like there's a guy who has to see it and think it up. The way-seeking mind is out there. It's its own expression of time. And when we see time and see the fullness of everything in time, way-seeking mind arises. Where does it arise? Well, it arises in time. It also arises in our mind. And our minds are also time. And time is also mind. Big mind. Thus, the self setting itself out in array, fanning the entire world, going to Zion Park in Utah or the Grand Canyon or standing anywhere you have a vista. The self setting itself out in array sees itself. This is the understanding that the self is time. It's not personal. It's not a private, precious possession. That's our personality. And being able to take little holidays from that personality, which is very demanding. Our ego obviously has a job to do for us, or it would never have survived the crucible of evolution. Helps me brush my teeth, wash my face, take a bath when I smell, eat well, sleep, take care of myself. It pays attention to this sack of skin and how everything affects it. But after a while, it turns into a warden. It stops being a counselor, becomes a warden. We get very strict ideas of what this personality is, what I like, what I don't like, what I can't tolerate. As if this little jelly bean was not floating in infinite space as just one beat of time, and that we're not chained to it. We're chained to it for this lifetime. But we can also take little peaks and little holidays out. Like we can't live in the ocean, but we can go to the beach and go into the water, and 20 feet offshore you're in wildness. And you can explore wildness. And you can feel the breadth of the horizon, the vastness of it. And we can feel the vastness of big mind. And the best technology that I've ever seen for learning how to do that is sitting zazen and meditating. So what is the array that Dogen's talking about? When the self arrays itself. He's talking about creation itself. The self is not separate from creation. Personality thinks it is. But the self is just the blank screen in the movie theater, which will reflect whatever is projected on it. Where's the projector? It's creation. It's big mind. It's out of our hands. It's impossible to understand. But we can experience it when we can stop our little petty judgments and suspend what we like and what we don't like. That's why we sit. And because we're not in it alone, because we share this time, these moments of time, with other moments of time, we try to treat them well. It's why we practice the precepts. It's why we practice the Eightfold Path, to create a world of harmony and serenity. We have to try. It's very difficult for me to be serene when I talk about politics. And I catch myself all the time being too adamant, too certain, too in love with my own thinking. That's my personality. Has some good points, but all you have to do is look at Congress on television. You'll see the bad points. But outside of it, in the vastness that surrounds all of that little stuff, we can come in contact with what's actually going on. And once we understand that we are time, we can't be pushed around as much. Once we understand that we are the array that's out there, the impulse arises to care for it. I mean, would you rather see the streets of Yemen and Afghanistan? Or would you rather see streets filled with happy, contented people? Or wilderness? It's called bodhicitta. It arises spontaneously, the desire to help others. And others, to me, includes other species, other forms of life. Because the self is formless, not the personality, the self. Because the self is formless, it's expressed as skin and marrow and blood and bone, the body, and then all the 10,000 things, which is what the Chinese called the rest of the world. The self is formless. Personality has lots of ideas. Here's Dogen again. Know that in this way there are myriads of forms and hundreds of grasses. It's like one of those Chinese or Japanese metaphors for everything. Myriads of forms, hundreds of grasses throughout the entire earth. And yet each grass is the earth itself, is the entire earth. The study of this is the beginning of practice. Ask yourself, how can that be? This blade of grass is the entire earth. I don't want to give you the cliff notes. I'll take away the fun of you working on it. Since there's nothing but just this moment, the time being is all the time there is. Grass being, form being, self being, tree being, wolf being, hummingbird being, are all time. Just actualize all time as all being. All running at different speeds. A hummingbird's pulses and stuff are really different than mine. That's something else again. There's nothing extra. Just actualize all time as all being. Your understanding of it is time. The way you think about it is expressed through time. It's not just the coming and going, but the abiding in the present moment. Get pretty distracted with coming and going, especially the going part. As I get older, I'm on the phone with people who've died. I was on the phone this morning with someone who just lost their brother. That's the going part. We don't want to get so locked into the going that we miss the fullness of the moment. Life is life. It's not a preparation for death. Death is its own thing. It has its own time. So the grasses are time. Our efforts to understand it are time. Our thoughts about our efforts are time. Who is there that exists outside of time to be looking at this and thinking about this? Is there anyone? This is what has to be studied and thought about. Spring with all its this is Dogen. Spring with all its numerous aspects is called flowing. When spring's flowing, there's nothing outside of spring. Everything is spring. Every part of it is spring. Birds nesting, birds falling out of the nest, weasels eating baby birds, people photographing birds. It's all spring. It's all in the fullness of abiding in spring. This is just another way of saying that everything is time. Mountains and oceans are time. If time is annihilated, so are mountains and oceans. They might have just appeared to you or to me, but they have their own time. They exist in time. So the idea of living in this world without time is an impossibility. Dogen explains it. This is we're closing, but this is where Dogen gets really wiggy. So I'll just read it. I love it. Arriving is fulfilled by arriving, not by not arriving. Not arriving is fulfilled by not arriving, but not by arriving. Mind fulfills mind and sees mind. Words fulfill words and sees words. Fulfilling fulfills fulfilling. Anything that you can name is a moment in time. Oh, it's raining, pouring rain here. It's so beautiful. Then as an act of mercy, Dogen says, as fulfilling is caused by you, all these ideas, arriving, coming, going, as fulfilling is caused by you, there's no fulfilling that's separate from you. There's no enlightenment that's separate from you. There's no wisdom that's separate from you. There's no practice of Buddhism that's separate from you. Thus, you go out and you meet someone. Well, someone meets someone, or you meet yourself, or going out meets going out. These are descriptions of the world from an ego-free zone, which is called time. Thank you very much. I'll do the little metta prayer. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace.